Welcome back guys, Carboss here, back with another video where I talk about cars, money investing. This is episode 2 of this new content format. I appreciate all the feedback that I got on the first episode, and we'll continue to try and deliver more interesting and useful content around the card investing world as well as collecting, right? So from the title of today's video, you're in for a nice juicy story of a critical mistake that I did, and not only caused me to lose some money, right, but to kind of like fall behind in taking a position in the overall F1 market. And the lesson learned here can be translated across all the other card markets as well, which I would kind of like describe the story in full later on. Now, let's first talk about F1 cards briefly. Formula 1 cards has been around for like quite a number of years already, but Topps Chrome released its first flagship product in 2020, as well as two other major products during the year called Topps Chrome Sapphire and the Dynasty, which is a pure autograph set. Now, each of these sets were mega hits, right? And last year especially, and it resulted in a huge influx of collectors coming in as well as investors, right? So investors kind of like smelled the blood in the water. So lots and lots of people entered the market last year, and it was quite a mega hit towards the middle of last year, but it kind of cooled down right after that. But we're starting to see a lot of interest, especially when the season began towards the end of last year. So everyone had like their own little theories, right, about Formula 1 cards, but here's where things get a bit tricky, right? Formula 1 itself is not really a mainstream sport. Yeah, it has those global, wide global audience such as like soccer, but the ins and outs of Formula 1 cards is relatively unknown. So everyone has kind of like their theories on what's going to be great, what's going to go up, what's going to go down. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to the basic fundamentals, whereby we talk about scarcity, i.e. the hard number cards, high graded cards, rookie cards, and of course autograph cards, right? So you guys kind of get the idea. Nothing wrong with this approach at all. In the long run, if any new investor were to come in, that's kind of like what the advice I would give to you, and eventually you will make money in the long run, averaging out all the ups and downs. But what actually went sideways for me was I tried to be a bit creative, right? Maybe too creative perhaps. Now, any card market, be it the NBA, F1, Marvel, right, it's generally broken down into four main pillars, right? It's the high end, the medium end, general collectors, and seal products, or wax, as some of us call it, right? So there is a fifth pillar, which is vintage, but it's considered kind of like a niche pillar. So I don't usually talk about that very often. But the four pillars is normally where you, or in fact most people spend most time on, right? So these pillars, with exception of wax, are obviously segmented by price, right? Based on the name itself, high end, medium end, and general collectors. And as an investor, you normally find yourself, targeting at least one, maybe more pillars, right? Funds and budget permitted, of course. And this is very normal, right? But when I looked at F1, I noticed something pretty unusual, which is there is a clear void on the medium spectrum, right? And medium end for F1 cards, by definition, is something between the $500 to the $2,000 range. Now, I'm not saying that there is no transactions at all that fall within this particular price range, but what we notice is most activity are actually happening on either extreme of the pillars, right? So you see a lot of activity on the high-end stuff, as well as a lot of activity on the general collecting side. People trying to make sets and things like that. And one thing to note is I came to this conclusion, through some level of research, but I wouldn't say that it was a very deep understanding of the F1 market as a whole. So when I dived into a bit further, right, it was clear that that huge disparity between high-end collectors who chase autograph cards or low number parallels, spending upwards between $2,000 to $10,000 on each card, versus the fast-growing general collector base who are interested in putting together base sets, or rainbow parallels, or just their favorite driver, within the means, and not necessarily focus on the big names like Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen, which then led a question to myself, right? Looking at the sheer volume of new collectors that's entering into the space, and the lack of the middle market, which I pointed out earlier, surely, I can assume that a good percentage of these general collectors would kind of like upgrade themselves, right, or upgrade their collections and move into the middle segment within a particular period of time. So, and if you look at the NBA market, for example, right, that was kind of like the progression that we saw, right? From base cards to Prism to gold refractors, R10, etc., and perhaps ultimately to the national treasures or the flawless, those high-end stuff. And no doubt the funnel or the number of people gets narrow due to the increased cost base. But looking at the current situation, where there's actually a void in the middle market, I would think that there is extremely strong opportunity to get a step ahead of everyone else, right? So, and that's where I went in, right, with the purple refractors, and that's number up to $399 for the 2020 Topps Chrome, and I did a whole video about that previously. Now, however, I then realized a few months later, and a few races into the season, that the gradual shift that I thought was going to happen didn't really happen, right? In fact, what I noticed is the high-end market continued to grow exponentially, and the general collector base, continued to expand with every increasing race. And I find my purple refractors suddenly being devalued by about 25% within the span of a couple of weeks, because literally it was in no man's land. Okay, it was too common for the high-end and too expensive for the general collectors who just want to spend like the $200 to or for as many cards as they can get their hands on. So, just like the phrase "stuck in the middle," I find myself at a crossroad whether or not to pivot out, or try to stick to the lane as long as I can, which I so strongly believe in. I don't really have the answer today, but if I had to redo all over again, right, the real answer to Formula One multiple choice questions, right, was to go into sealed products, in particular the Topps Chrome 2020 and the Topps Dynasty 2020. Prices for those today have definitely escalated a lot. So I would say don't, but to me it's not cost effective to look into this space. Try and squeeze that sliver of margins, right? For such a capital intensive movement of roughly about $3,000 to $5,000 a box. Of course, it's nothing compared to basketball, right, or football, whereby those boxes are really, really expensive and people are still paying a lot of money. But you have to compare the markets where they operate in, right? NBA or football is such a huge market, right, compared to F1, which is still really, really small. But F1 as a sport, it's extremely predictive, right? And the individual card prices do reflect that. For me in this situation, I kind of like just chose the wrong lane. So, but eventually I may just be forced to take a loss and probably just move on. So at the end of the day, the takeaway for anyone entering a new market, which they have less than optimal familiarity with, is that almost correct to follow what works and try not to outsmart the whole situation, right? This happens a lot to sports card investors who are actually branching out to different streams like Marvel, F1, trading card games, with little or no knowledge of what they're getting into. And when things go the right way, they blame like the hype, market overheating, content creators and influencers, right, whatever. Despite the market taking away my money, what I get back is kind of like valuable lessons and knowledge, which is going to stick with me going forward. Alright, thanks for watching this video. Do subscribe to this channel for more content in the future. Till the next one, Cowboys out.